Every empire in history believed it would last forever. Every one of them was wrong. Spain, Britain, the Soviet Union, three superpowers, each convinced of their own permanence, collapsed through a sequence so predictable, so mathematically consistent, that it resembles a blueprint more than a mystery. It is a pattern of rise and decay repeated across centuries, across continents, across ideologies. And now, in the year 2025, the United States is following this same pattern step by step, unaware that it has already crossed 5 of the 7 thresholds that mark the end of an empire. Collapse doesn't announce itself with grand explosions or dramatic invasions. It doesn't begin with armies at the border or flags falling from capitals. Imperial collapse is quiet, silent even, until it suddenly isn't. It starts deep beneath the surface, invisible to the average citizen, unnoticed by those who assume power is permanent. The currency still functions. The military still projects strength. The government still speaks with confidence. Yet the foundation is already cracking. Economic exhaustion takes root. Productive capacity shrinks. Debt accelerates. Talent leaves. And a civilization built on momentum begins to drift without direction. By the time ordinary people notice the decay around them, the collapse is already irreversible. The final moment simply reveals what had been unfolding for years. To understand the present, we must begin with the first empire that wrote this pattern into history. In the 1500s, Spain became the world's first true global superpower. Fueled by gold and silver from the Americas, Spanish galleons carried unimaginable wealth across the Atlantic. The Spanish real became the world's reserve currency. Spain appeared invincible. Yet the very wealth that made Spain powerful would become the poison that destroyed it. Overflowing treasure encouraged endless wars, campaigns against the Ottoman Empire, France, England, Italian states, the Netherlands, and rebellions across the Atlantic and Pacific. Spain tried to project power in every direction, believing its vast wealth made it unstoppable. But when the cost of empire outgrew the productivity of the nation itself, the decline began. To pay for mounting expenses, the crown debased its currency. Silver coins were diluted with copper, then with more copper, until their real value evaporated. Inflation surged. Trust collapsed. The empire began borrowing, massively, and defaulted again and again. 1557, 1560, 1575, and 1596. 4 bankruptcies within 40 years. The collapse of productivity followed. Why build industries when mountains of silver arrive each year? Why innovate when you can import everything? Spain stopped producing. It imported food, tools, textiles, everything that once defined power. When the silver shipments slowed, the economy imploded. Social decay soon followed. Crime rose. Poverty spread. Talent fled. The empire, once feared and respected, decayed from within. Spain never recovered. 3 centuries later, Britain stepped into the role of global hegemon. At its peak, the British Empire controlled a quarter of Earth's landmass and ruled more than 400 million people. The pound sterling was the world's reserve currency. London was the financial center of the world. And yet, Britain quietly entered the same death sequence that had destroyed Spain. Military commitments stretched across the globe, from India to Africa, the Middle East to Southeast Asia. The empire was vast, expensive, and increasingly fragile. Then came World War I. The war cost Britain more than $1 trillion in today's terms. Britain borrowed heavily, primarily from the rising power across the Atlantic, the United States. The superpower had become the debtor. In an attempt to restore confidence in the pound, Britain returned to the gold standard at its pre-war rate. This decision overvalued the currency, crushed exports, and triggered economic stagnation. In 1931, Britain abandoned the gold standard entirely. The pound collapsed, and with it, the illusion of endless dominance. World War II delivered the final blow. Britain emerged victorious, but economically broken. By 1945, the government owed more than its entire GDP. One by one, the colonies slipped away. India, Ghana, Malaysia, Kenya, Jamaica, dozens more. By the 1970s, the empire existed only in memory. Britain remained a nation of influence, but not an empire. Then came the Soviet Union, the only superpower to rival the United States. Its military might was immense: massive armies, nuclear weapons, satellites, global influence, but beneath the steel and spectacle, the economic engine was failing. The USSR spent an unsustainable share of its GDP on military expansion, trying to match the United States blow for blow. Factories produced low-quality goods. Farms routinely failed. Technology lagged decades behind the West. When global oil prices collapsed in the 1980s, the Soviet system could no longer disguise its weaknesses. The ruble was never trusted internally or internationally. Citizens hoarded dollars. The government survived on foreign currency, gold, and oil sales. When Eastern Europe rebelled in 1989, the Soviet Union could not afford to sustain its empire. And in 1991, it collapsed not through war, but through economic implosion. A superpower dissolved in less than 900 days. 3 empires: Spain, Britain, the Soviet Union. 3 different eras. 3 different ideologies. Yet each slid through the same 7 stages of collapse: overextension, currency debasement, debt spiral, loss of productive capacity, social decay, loss of reserve currency, sudden collapse. This is not ideology. It is mathematics. And now, in the modern age, the United States is walking this same path, quickly, visibly, and with alarming precision. Like Spain, Britain, and the USSR, the United States has pursued global military dominance at extraordinary cost. With more than 750 bases in 150 countries, America maintains the largest military footprint in human history. Its defense budget exceeds the next 10 nations combined. Yet, equipment ages, recruitment declines, and commitments multiply. The nation is stretched thin in Europe, the Middle East, and the Pacific, mirroring the overextension that once drained past superpowers. Currency debasement has accelerated as well. Since abandoning the gold standard in 1971, the dollar has lost most of its purchasing power. The money supply has exploded, and trillions have been printed in just a few years. Inflation is not a mystery. It is the mathematical consequence of overproduction of currency. The debt spiral is now unmistakable. With more than $36 trillion owed and nearly $1 trillion paid annually in interest, the United States is spending more servicing debt than defending its nation. No empire in history has survived this stage without radical reform. Productive capacity has eroded. The U.S. relies heavily on foreign supply chains for essential goods: pharmaceuticals, electronics, steel, and even military components. Manufacturing has moved offshore, leaving the nation vulnerable to disruptions. A superpower without self-sufficiency is a superpower in decline. Social decay accelerates the pattern. Political polarization, declining trust in institutions, homelessness, drug epidemics, falling birth rates, and rising discontent mirror the social fractures seen in every collapsing empire. Stages 1 through 5 are no longer predictions. They are present realities. This leaves only 2 stages before the pattern reaches its conclusion: the loss of reserve currency status and the final collapse. And signs of the sixth stage are already emerging. Nations across the world are diversifying away from the dollar. BRICS countries are developing alternatives. China and Russia trade in their own currencies. Saudi Arabia has begun accepting yuan for oil. Global gold purchases are at record highs. The world is preparing, quietly, carefully, for a future where the US dollar is no longer the unquestioned center of global trade. If the reserve currency falters, the seventh stage begins. And when it does, collapse is not gradual. It is sudden. The Soviet Union didn't dissolve over decades. It ended in less than 3 years. Britain lost its empire in 20. Spain in less than a century. Superpowers don't drift downward gently. They fall sharply, violently, unexpectedly. If America enters the final 2 stages, the world will change overnight. Trade will realign. Alliances will fracture. New powers will rise. Domestic instability will increase. And the United States, still powerful, still influential, will no longer be an empire, but a nation adjusting to a world it no longer commands. Spain believed it was exempt from this fate. Britain believed it was exempt. The Soviet Union believed it was exempt. Now America believes the same. But the pattern does not care about beliefs. It cares about mathematics. And mathematics rarely shows mercy. Perhaps the United States will reform in time. Perhaps it will become the first empire in history to escape the pattern. But if it does not, the next decade will reveal what happens when a superpower crosses the final threshold. If this narrative opened your eyes to where we stand in the sequence of history, subscribe. Because as Stage 6 becomes undeniable and Stage 7 begins, understanding the past may be the only way to survive the future. On Economic Rewind, we don't predict the future. We decode the past to reveal the future already hidden within it.